Let's move on to the to narrative or game development. Have there been any like unexpected troubles that you've run into that you really want people going in to understand?
Yeah. um, Probably the number one thing that you need to understand is that like most game developers never make enough money that they get to make game development their full-time job.
Mm, okay.
That is actually extremely rare.
Right.
And usually you don't get to have like a full-time job as game development until you're like 5, 10 years into the industry. It's just indie game development is not it. You don't earn money. You just like don't earn money.
Sure.
That's the case. That's why most indie developers have full-time jobs. And that's why funding making indie games is so hard because most people don't get paid for like a living wage for working on the games.
Right.
They work on it in their spare time and like maybe get like $1,000 or $2,000. A lot of
Yeah.
Kickstarters games, for example, people will pay themselves like $1,000 or $2,000 for 2.5 years worth of work. And it's
Right.
so if you're heading into game development, or if you are even in game development right now and you don't feel like you're successful because you're basically making no money, don't feel bad.
Yes,
Don't
of
feel
course.
bad. It's it's pretty normal even though it shouldn't be.
Right. And money should probably never be the form that success takes, right? Like it's very easy, not easy. It's very possible to be creatively successful without being super financially successful with your creation specifically, right? But also I think, when you were talking about Kickstarters earlier, I think it's so easy to look at the indie games where Kickstarters went viral and suddenly all goals are met and whatnot, and then they start making DLC and all these like all these popular indie games. But the reality is you know about those because they popped off, and it's something that doesn't happen all the time, right? It's not like you can't just expect to have an entirely funded game to make a game of your dreams just because you've seen it happen to a select other games. And I imagine that could be a misconception going in.
Very much so. But even honestly, even with like Kickstarters that go that viral, people assume that the people making those Kickstarters are making a lot of money. And the majority of the money that's being
Right.
spent in those viral Kickstarters is being spent on like the actual budget of making the game or marketing the game
Sure.
or publishing the game or buying like it's most of it doesn't go to the devs.
Right,
So
right.
even though it might look like you always see people being like, "Oh, they had like $2 million. Where'd that all go?" And it's like we can very easily tell you where it all goes. First of all, like 30% of it goes to taxes and Kickstarter fees. So first of all,
Right. That's
there's a
something to
lot of
keep
things people
an
don't think
important
about.
thing. Yeah, like those sites, they're not. It's not like all the money goes to you. That otherwise they wouldn't exist. So that's something.
Yeah.
Man, it's weird because I don't even normally like think about that when I see all the numbers and all the goals reached. But it's like you're right. So much of that doesn't even go to the developers. It goes directly into the game. Yeah. So I guess just
Or
it's.
into making the merch for the Kickstarter rewards, which is usually way more expensive than people
Mm,
anticipate.
right. Yeah. Because like man, getting a distributor for merch can cost way more than just buying a shirt in a store, right? Like it's yeah, it's tough from what I
Generally,
understand.
yeah, the more you buy, the cheaper it is, but that's like, it gets into the thousands of dollars to buy like a couple hundred keychains just to send them to your backers. And then you're paying for shipping, you're paying for the
Right.
packaging, you're paying for the time spent that shipping all that stuff out. And also the hours that people don't think about where you're trying to wrangle your Kickstarter backers into giving you the information that you need to send them the
Right.
stuff. There's a
Right.
lot of extra work that people don't often think about,
So
which is
then
fair.
would you in general would you recommend crowdfunding as a good method of getting your game off the ground, or is there other avenues you would recommend over that? Even if it's tricky either way.
So I have run a successful Kickstarter myself. And what I will tell you, I won't say don't do it, but I will say that every game developer that I know who has run a successful Kickstarter says that they would like to try and find literally any other avenue of method of funding before they go back to Kickstarter. It's kind
Interesting.
of, I think that So first of all, like running the Kickstarter is ridiculously stressful because your hopes and dreams are riding on this thing, and you don't sleep for the whole month pretty much that you're doing it.
Sure.
But then there's this known thing that happens after Kickstarters, for people who've run them, which is just post Kickstarter depression. And I don't know why it happens, but for months people can be extremely depressed, and you also have the burden of now, like, however many people backed your successful product, you have the burden of all of their hopes and dreams, and you feel so stressed for the entire rest of development, because you're always like, I hope that this meets up to what their expectations were, and that they didn't invest in me and my project only to be disappointed. It's a kind of a mental nightmare.
Yeah, because even if it's dressed up as a kind of a donation thing, like you're helping a creator with their dreams or something like that, there's still some form of product that has to be delivered for the money spent, and you can't help but feel that you got to make a proper delivery on all those assumptions of what people expect. So if Kickstarter might not be the best place to start off, then do you have any other advice for people who are trying to get funding for the game, or maybe some other anecdotes that might help them?
There's a lot of different ways now that people can pursue funding, now that game companies have become more friendly towards indies.
Sure.
I would look into getting a functional, good, solid demo of your game and like a really good marketing trailer, and shop that around. Like, try to gain interest not only from other people like going to cons and shopping your game out there, but try to get meetings with large game companies and be like, or publishing houses, would you like to sponsor this game? Like, would you like to invest in this game? Some people, to be honest, go the route of doing Kickstarter first. And some publishers even ask you to do this. Some publishers will be like, if you can get 50% of the funding through Kickstarter, then we will agree to fund the rest of your game.
Interesting.
So sometimes people use crowdfunding to gain attention so that they can then go to a publisher and be like, would you mind ponying up the rest of the money? Look at how much of a demand there is.
Right. Wow, that's fascinating. I would have never guessed that, but it makes so much sense once you explain it. Like, understanding like, hey, there's actual interest for this game or whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Well, and especially like you mentioned Undertale, when Undertale was kind of a watershed moment for the game industry at large, realizing that indie games were kind of a big deal, and B, cozier, like more feelings oriented games were a market that people were ready for.
Yes.
People wanted to get it. So there's lots of like newly emerging markets that publishers have traditionally ignored that now they're very interested in, and like hyper niche markets where like you get maybe like one game every 5 years, and the publishers are now interested in serving this niche market.
Hey there. You just watched a clip from my creative podcast. If you'd like to check out the full episode as well as other episodes as soon as they come out, you can support me over on Patreon for the $3 tier, or you can just subscribe here and wait for clips and podcast episodes to come out eventually.